You know what's wild? For years I thought anxiety was the enemy. I treated it like this unwanted intruder in my life, something I needed to fight, suppress, or eliminate completely. I'd wake up with that familiar tightness in my chest, that racing heartbeat, those spiraling thoughts, and I'd immediately go into battle mode. Push it down, distract myself, pretend it wasn't there. And you know what happened? It got worse. So much worse. But then something shifted. I started looking at anxiety differently. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that this perspective change didn't just help me manage my anxiety. It fundamentally transformed my entire relationship with myself, my emotions, and how I move through the world. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, because once you see anxiety the way I'm about to show you, you'll never look at it the same way again. So, let's dive in. Here's the thing that nobody really talks about when it comes to anxiety. We've been conditioned by society, by mental health messaging, even by well-meaning therapists sometimes, to view anxiety as purely negative. It's categorized as a disorder, a problem, something that needs to be fixed or medicated away. And look, I'm not saying that anxiety disorders aren't real or that people don't genuinely suffer, because they absolutely do. I've been there. I've had panic attacks so severe I thought I was dying. I've cancelled plans, avoided opportunities, and spent countless nights lying awake with my mind racing through every possible catastrophe. But here's what changed everything for me, and this is the core insight I want you to really absorb today. Anxiety isn't actually the problem. Anxiety is information, it's data. It's your nervous system trying to communicate something incredibly important to you, and we've been taught to ignore the message because we don't like how it feels. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a smoke detector in your house, and one day it starts going off. Now you have two options. Option one is to rip the smoke detector off the wall, throw it in the trash, and go about your day in silence. Option two is to investigate why it's going off. Is there actually a fire? Is there just some burnt toast? Does the battery need replacing? Is it malfunctioning? The point is, the smoke detector isn't the problem. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is alert you to potential danger. Anxiety works the same way. Your anxiety is not malfunctioning when it shows up. It's not broken. It's actually doing its job, which is to get your attention and point you towards something that needs to be addressed. But we've become so focused on silencing the alarm that we never stop to ask what it's trying to tell us. Now, before you think I'm about to give you some toxic positivity speech about how anxiety is actually a gift and you should be grateful for it, hold on. I'm not saying that. Anxiety is uncomfortable. It's painful. It can be debilitating. But what I am saying is that when we shift from viewing anxiety as an enemy to viewing it as a messenger, everything changes. Because once you start listening to what your anxiety is telling you, you can actually do something about the underlying issues, instead of just constantly trying to manage the symptoms. And this is where it gets really interesting, because anxiety isn't just giving you one type of message. Different types of anxiety are pointing to different things, and learning to decode these messages is like learning a new language, the language of your own nervous system. Let me break this down for you. There's what I call surface-level anxiety, which is your immediate response to a perceived threat in your environment. You're about to give a presentation, you're running late for something important, you're having a difficult conversation. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your mind goes a little fuzzy. This is your fight or flight response activating, and it's actually trying to help you. It's mobilizing energy and resources so you can perform or respond to the challenge. The problem isn't that this response is happening. The problem is that most of us have never been taught how to work with this energy instead of against it. Athletes call this pre-game jitters. Performers call it stage fright. It's the same physiological response, but some people have learned to channel that energy into focus and performance, while others let it spiral into panic. But then there's deeper anxiety, the kind that doesn't seem to be attached to any specific event or trigger. You just wake up feeling anxious. You feel anxious for no reason. This is the anxiety that people find most frustrating because there's nothing obvious to fix or avoid. But here's what I've learned. This type of anxiety is almost always pointing to something beneath the surface. It might be pointing to a misalignment between how you're living and what you actually value. It might be pointing to unprocessed emotions or unresolved trauma that your body is still holding on to. It might be pointing to chronic stress that you've been ignoring for so long that your nervous system is now just stuck in a state of hypervigilance. It might be pointing to a lifestyle that's completely out of balance, where you're not sleeping enough, not moving your body, not connecting with people, not giving yourself any space to just be. And this is where the real transformation happens. When you start asking yourself, what is my anxiety trying to tell me? You move from being a victim of your anxiety to being a detective, a collaborator with your own nervous system. Instead of asking, how do I make this stop? You start asking, what does this mean? What am I not paying attention to? What boundary do I need to set? What conversation do I need to have? What change do I need to make? What grief have I not allowed myself to feel? What dream have I been too scared to pursue? What truth have I been avoiding? These are the questions that anxiety is pushing you toward, and when you actually engage with them, when you actually do the work of listening and responding, the anxiety often naturally decreases because you're addressing the root cause instead of just managing the symptoms. Let me give you a concrete example from my own life. A few years ago, I was experiencing constant low-level anxiety. Nothing dramatic, no panic attacks, just this persistent unease that followed me everywhere. I tried everything to get rid of it. Meditation, exercise, cutting out caffeine, improving my sleep hygiene. And sure, those things helped a little bit, but the anxiety was still there like background noise I couldn't turn off. Then one day, after months of this, I was journaling and I asked myself that question, what is this anxiety trying to tell me? And the answer that came up surprised me. I was in a relationship that wasn't right for me. I had known this on some level for a while, but I had been avoiding really confronting it because ending the relationship would be hard and messy and painful. My anxiety wasn't random. It was my internal compass trying to tell me that I was off course, that I was compromising something essential in myself by staying in a situation that didn't align with who I was or what I needed. Now, here's the thing. Recognizing that didn't make the anxiety immediately disappear. I still had to do the hard work of having difficult conversations and making difficult decisions. But the anxiety shifted from being this vague, overwhelming thing to being specific and actionable. It went from, there's something wrong with me, to, there's something wrong with this situation, and I have agency to change it. And that shift in perspective made all the difference. Because when you see anxiety as information, you stop spending so much energy fighting yourself, and you start directing that energy toward actually changing the circumstances or addressing the needs that are creating the anxiety in the first place. But let's go even deeper, because there's another layer to this that most people don't consider. Anxiety doesn't just point to external circumstances that need to change. It often points to internal patterns and beliefs that need to be examined and updated. A lot of our anxiety comes from unconscious beliefs that we've carried with us since childhood. Beliefs like, I'm not safe unless I'm perfect. I'm not worthy unless I'm productive. People will abandon me if I show my true feelings. I have to control everything or disaster will happen. These beliefs run in the background like software on a computer, and they generate anxiety as a natural byproduct. Because if you believe that you have to be perfect, or else you're worthless, then of course you're going to feel anxious every time you make a mistake or face a challenge where you might not excel. If you believe that people will abandon you if you're vulnerable, then of course you're going to feel anxious in relationships and constantly scan for signs of rejection. The beautiful thing is that once you start seeing anxiety as a messenger pointing to these beliefs, you can actually work with them. You can question them. You can test them against reality. You can update them with new information and experiences. And as those core beliefs shift, the anxiety that was being generated by them naturally decreases. I want to share another perspective that completely changed how I relate to anxiety, and this one might sound a little strange at first. But stay with me. Anxiety is often a sign that you're growing. Think about it. When do you feel most anxious? Usually when you're stepping outside your comfort zone, when you're trying something new, when you're taking a risk, when you're pursuing something that matters to you. We've been taught to interpret this anxiety as a stop sign, as evidence that we're doing something wrong or dangerous. But what if it's actually a sign that you're doing something right? What if anxiety is just the feeling of your old self stretching to accommodate your new self? What if it's the sensation of growth itself? I'm not talking about the anxiety that comes from genuinely unsafe situations or from ignoring your boundaries. I'm talking about the anxiety that shows up when you're about to have an important conversation, when you're about to put your work out into the world, when you're about to be honest about what you want, when you're about to choose yourself, even though it might disappoint others. That anxiety isn't warning you away from danger. It's the price of admission for a bigger, more authentic life. Here's what I've noticed in my own experience and in working with others. The people who seem to have the least anxiety aren't the people who've eliminated it from their lives. They're the people who've changed their relationship with it. They've learned to recognize it, to listen to it, to thank it for the information, and then to move forward anyway. They don't wait for the anxiety to go away before they act. They act with the anxiety present, and often that's what allows it to dissipate. Because anxiety thrives on avoidance. The more you avoid the things that make you anxious, the more power the anxiety has over you, and the smaller your life becomes. But when you learn to feel the anxiety and do the thing anyway, you're sending a message to your nervous system that says, I hear you, I appreciate you trying to protect me, but we're actually okay. We can handle this, and over time, your nervous system recalibrates. It learns that the things you were anxious about weren't actually dangerous, and it stops sending quite so many alarm signals. Now, I want to address something important here, because I don't want this to come across as minimizing the very real struggle of anxiety disorders. There's a difference between everyday anxiety that we all experience and clinical anxiety that significantly impairs your functioning. If your anxiety is so severe that it's preventing you from living your life, if you're having frequent panic attacks, if you can't leave your house or maintain relationships or hold down a job, please seek professional help. Therapy, medication, and other interventions can be incredibly valuable and sometimes necessary. What I'm talking about here is a framework for understanding and working with anxiety that can be applied alongside professional treatment, not instead of it. And even within the context of treatment, this shift in perspective from viewing anxiety as a purely negative symptom to viewing it as information that can guide your healing can be incredibly powerful. Many therapists are now incorporating this approach into their work, helping clients get curious about their anxiety rather than just trying to eliminate it. Let me talk about some practical ways to start implementing this shift in your own life. The first step is simply to pause when you notice anxiety arising, instead of immediately trying to make it go away. This pause is crucial because it creates space between the feeling and your reaction to it. In that space, you can start to get curious. You can ask yourself, what is this anxiety about? What is it trying to tell me? And here's the key. You have to be willing to sit with the discomfort long enough to actually listen for an answer. This isn't always easy. Our instinct is to distract ourselves, to numb out, to immediately reach for something that will make us feel better. But if you can resist that urge for just a few minutes and really tune in to what's happening in your body and mind, you'll often start to get clarity about what the anxiety is pointing to. Maybe you'll realize you're anxious because you've been pushing yourself too hard and your body is begging for rest. Maybe you'll realize you're anxious because you need to have a difficult conversation you've been putting off. Maybe you'll realize you're anxious because you're about to do something that matters deeply to you and the stakes feel high. Whatever the message is, the simple act of receiving it changes your relationship with the anxiety. The second practical step is to start differentiating between productive anxiety and unproductive anxiety. Productive anxiety is anxiety that's pointing you towards something you need to do or change. It's anxiety that contains useful information and that naturally resolves when you take action on that information. Unproductive anxiety is anxiety that's just spinning in circles, usually because it's based on catastrophic thinking or worst-case scenarios that are extremely unlikely. Learning to tell the difference between these two types of anxiety is a game changer. When you're experiencing productive anxiety, the right response is to listen to it and take action. When you're experiencing unproductive anxiety, the right response is to acknowledge it, thank your brain for trying to protect you, and then consciously redirect your attention to something more useful. This isn't about suppressing or ignoring the anxiety. It's about recognizing that not all anxious thoughts deserve your full attention and engagement. Some of them are just noise, and you can let them pass through without getting hooked by them. The third practical step is to build a relationship with your nervous system through body-based practices. Here's something most people don't realize. Anxiety isn't just a mental or emotional experience, it's primarily a physiological experience. Your nervous system detects a threat, real or perceived, and activates a stress response in your body. Your heart rate increases, your breathing gets shallow, stress hormones flood your system, your muscles tense up. This happens before you even consciously register that you're feeling anxious. So if you want to work with anxiety effectively, you need to work with your body, not just your mind. This is where practices like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, gentle movement, and body scanning come in. These aren't just relaxation techniques. They're ways of communicating directly with your nervous system, sending it signals of safety that help it come back down from a state of high alert. When you slow your breathing, when you consciously relax your muscles, when you move your body in ways that feel good, you're literally changing the physiological state that's generating the anxiety. And when your body feels safer, your mind naturally calms down too. Let me share something that was really counterintuitive for me to learn. Sometimes the best thing you can do with anxiety is absolutely nothing. Just let it be there. We've become so obsessed with fixing and managing and controlling our emotional states that we've lost the ability to simply be with difficult feelings without having to do anything about them. But anxiety, like all emotions, is actually designed to be temporary. It rises, it peaks, and if you don't fight it or feed it with catastrophic thinking, it naturally subsides. The problem is that most of us never let the cycle complete because we interrupt it with resistance or avoidance. We tense up against the anxiety, which creates more tension in the body, which the nervous system interprets as more threat, which generates more anxiety. Or we try to distract ourselves or escape from the situation, which provides temporary relief, but teaches our brain that the thing we were anxious about really was dangerous, which makes us more anxious the next time we encounter it. But if you can learn to just be with anxiety, to feel it fully without resistance and without trying to make it mean something terrible about you or your life, you'll often find that it passes much more quickly than you expected. And each time you do this, you're building evidence for your nervous system that anxiety isn't actually dangerous. It's just uncomfortable, and discomfort is something you can handle. I also want to talk about the role of meaning in anxiety, because this is huge and often overlooked. A lot of our anxiety comes from a lack of meaning or purpose in our lives. When you're engaged in work that matters to you, when you're connected to people you care about, when you're working toward goals that align with your values, you still experience stress and challenges. But they feel different. They feel manageable. They feel worth it. But when you're going through the motions of a life that doesn't feel meaningful to you, even small stresses can feel overwhelming because there's no larger context that makes them worthwhile. Your anxiety might be telling you that you need to reconnect with what matters to you. It might be telling you that you need to make space in your life for things that bring you joy, connection, growth, or contribution. It might be telling you that you've been living according to someone else's definition of success, and it's time to figure out what success actually means to you. These are big questions, and they can feel overwhelming to consider, but I truly believe that much of the anxiety epidemic we're seeing in modern society comes from this disconnect between how we're living and what would actually make our lives feel meaningful and worthwhile. Here's another crucial insight. Anxiety often increases when we're living in the future or the past instead of the present moment. Think about the last time you felt really anxious. I'd be willing to bet that your mind was either replaying something that already happened, worrying about it, analyzing it, or it was projecting into the future, imagining all the things that could go wrong, planning for contingencies, trying to control outcomes. Anxiety can't really exist in the present moment. It requires you to be somewhere other than where you actually are. This is why mindfulness practices can be so helpful for anxiety. Not because they make the anxiety go away, but because they train you to notice when your mind has drifted into anxious territory and gently bring yourself back to right now. What's actually happening in this moment? Not what might happen, Not what did happen, but what is happening. And usually, in the actual present moment, you're okay, you're breathing, you're here. The catastrophe you're imagining hasn't happened. The shame you're carrying about the past isn't actually happening right now. When you can anchor yourself in the present, even for just a few moments, anxiety loses much of its power. Let's talk about the social dimension of anxiety, because this is something we really need to address. We live in an incredibly anxious culture right now. We're bombarded with information about threats, dangers, and crises constantly. Social media shows us everyone else's highlight reel while we're living our behind-the-scenes struggles. We're expected to be constantly productive, constantly available, constantly optimizing ourselves. The pace of change is faster than it's ever been in human history. These are genuinely anxiety-producing circumstances, and it's important to recognize that your anxiety isn't just a personal failing. It's a reasonable response to unreasonable conditions. But here's the thing. While you can't control the larger culture, you can make choices about how you engage with it. You can limit your news consumption. You can curate your social media to reduce comparison and outrage. You can build in time for rest and connection instead of constant productivity. You can push back against the hustle culture narrative that tells you your worth is determined by your output. These aren't just self-care strategies. They're acts of resistance against a culture that profits from your anxiety. And they're ways of creating conditions in your own life that support your nervous system instead of constantly activating it. I want to share one more really important piece of this puzzle, and that's the role of self-compassion in working with anxiety. Most of us are incredibly harsh with ourselves about our anxiety. We judge ourselves for feeling it. We feel weak or broken or flawed. We compare ourselves to other people who seem to have it all together and wonder what's wrong with us. But this self-criticism just adds another layer of suffering on top of the already difficult experience of anxiety. It's like being anxious about being anxious, and it actually makes the anxiety worse because you're creating internal conditions of threat and judgment, which is exactly what anxiety responds to. But when you can bring compassion to your experience, when you can say to yourself, "This is really hard, I'm struggling right now, and that's okay. It's a human experience," something shifts. The anxiety is still there, but you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not making it mean something terrible about who you are. You're just acknowledging that you're having a difficult moment, and you're treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer to a good friend going through something similar. This doesn't make the anxiety magically disappear, but it makes it so much more bearable. And it creates the conditions for healing instead of shame. So let's bring this all together. When you see anxiety as information instead of as an enemy, when you get curious about what it's trying to tell you instead of just trying to make it stop, when you recognize that it's often pointing you toward growth or change or truth that you need to face, everything changes. You stop being at war with yourself. You stop wasting so much energy fighting your own nervous system. You start developing trust in yourself and your ability to handle difficult emotions. You become more willing to take risks and pursue things that matter because you're not trying to avoid anxiety at all costs. You start making choices based on your values instead of your fears. And paradoxically, when you stop trying so hard to eliminate anxiety, it often naturally decreases because you're addressing the root causes instead of just managing symptoms. This doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious again. You will. Anxiety is part of the human experience. But your relationship with it will be completely different. Instead of it being this overwhelming force that controls your life, it becomes information you can work with, a signal you can respond to, a messenger you can learn from. And that changes everything. So the next time you feel that familiar flutter of anxiety, instead of immediately trying to push it away, take a breath. Get curious. Ask yourself, what are you trying to tell me? What do I need to pay attention to? What needs to change? What am I being called toward? And then trust yourself to listen to the answer and take whatever action feels right. That's how you transform your relationship with anxiety. That's how everything changes. Thank you so much for watching. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments below. Share your own experience with anxiety and how you're learning to work with it differently. And if you found this helpful, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. We're all in this together, and the more we can talk openly about these experiences, the less alone we all feel. I'll see you in the next video.